Sasha Lachapova and Jim Ferguson, very good to have you on. And we're talking about I'm going to call it the Netherlands court case because it's a parochial enough term that it will stick in people's minds. I want people to really follow this court case around the world. We mustn't just let this be one that comes and goes in our threads and that we don't stand up for around the world. It's a very important case, Jim, and you were there just a month or so ago outside the court. So could you give us a quick summary of why you went and what it involves? And then I'm going to talk to you, Sasha, about your expert testimony you're willing to give.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Liz. It's great to be on with you. Nice to see Sasha again as well. So basically, I'd been aware of the court case for quite a long time and knew it was coming up for a hearing, if you like, to have a look at preliminary evidence. So I covered it extensively for 2 to 3 days and wrote articles and different pieces on it, which did go viral, and they got a lot of attention. And then I went to the court. So I flew into the Netherlands, got a train away up to the north, up to Leeuwarden Courthouse, and I met a Dutch lawyer called Maaike ter Horst, who is a friend and somebody I've known for the last several years over there. I've been over to the Netherlands a lot. And she was in the court, and she had made arrangements to have me in the court so that I could actually hear what was being said and what was happening. When I arrived there were probably 300, 400, maybe 500 people already outside the court. Many had actually tried to get in as well into sort of the public viewing area. And the police panicked a little bit, Liz, because they sealed the doors and they wouldn't open them. So when I went to show my press pass and my ID, they wouldn't come to the door. So anyway, I set up my camera and I started to interview people in the crowd. And of course, they were wondering who I was. And then some of them realized who I was, and they were really pleased to see me there. So I did some interviews outside, all the while I'm sort of trying to get hold of Maaike inside the court to say, look, I'm out here, I can't get in, can you come to the door? And when they realized that I was authorized to go into the court, I couldn't get in, they started to chant, "Let Jim in." There was hundreds of people there chanting, "Let Jim in." So anyway, eventually I got in. And what was very significant about the court, I was sitting beside Maaike in the courthouse, and what was really significant about this was that all of the defendants, or apart from Bill Gates, had no legal representation there. But there was a lot of back and forth, and they were arguing about the fact that the expert witnesses all said that the vaccines were safe and effective. But it was countered, saying, well, that's your experts. But in actual fact, there are other experts, just as proficient and adept as your experts, who have a very different opinion. Those experts should be heard. And of course, Sasha and Michael Yaden, who I interviewed in London just a few weeks ago, and others were to give expert witness testimonies there. So when I came back outside the court, there was some local media there, no mainstream media at all. And it didn't appear in any of the mainstream outlets, as far as I'm aware. And certainly there was nobody there representing mainstream either. But there was an independent there, did an interview with them, spoke to them about it. And of course, the situation with Arno van Kessel, the lead lawyer in the case, who about 4 or 5 weeks before the court hearing had been arrested, blindfolded at his home, taken in cuffs to a maximum security facility by specialized police. And I've later found out that they are actually linked to NATO themselves. And if you remember right, Mark Rutte, the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, is now heading up NATO. So there is a lot of connections going on there. But they were really upset that Arno van Kessel had been detained without charge, by the way. So that sort of gives a little bit of a summary there. It was there was people had travelled hundreds of miles across the Netherlands to get to that courthouse. There was a huge interest there. I certainly got a very good welcome. It was nice to see all the people there.
And it was great to hear a journalist being hailed, "Let Jim in." We need journalists from around the world to follow this case, especially obviously on the alternative media, because as Jim says, the mainstream media is not following this. Sasha, when the mainstream media refuses to follow a major story where people like Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, all of the bad players in the pandemic are being sued in this court case, when the legacy media is not following this, we know that this is a story they want to die and we must keep it alive. So, Sasha, let's go to you. You are involved as one of those expert witnesses, but please give people the background to the court case itself. So we've got this side court case where the expert witnesses are being denied the right to have a preliminary hearing to give testimony. But tell us about the main court case itself, Sasha, and why you chose to get involved in such an important case.
Yes, so actually people need to understand right now we're speaking about two cases.
Yes.
So there was an original case that started about 2 years ago where there are seven victims. One already died from COVID-shot injuries. And they filed a case against Netherlands government officials, health officials. Mark Rutte, who was prime minister and now head of NATO, is named as one of the defendants, and Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and Albert Bourla also named as defendants. And that case alleges that they were participating, coordinating in committing genocide or democide, rather, in the Netherlands via lies and this militarized campaign, false representation of this event as a public health matter, and resulting in severe injuries to these people and everyone else who got injected with these shots. So that's kind of in a nutshell the summary of this case. And then so that case has been moving in court for about 2 years. More recently, there were 3 additional victims who came forward to the same legal team. And there is a procedure in the Netherlands in the law that you can go to the judge asking, I have this evidence and I'm bringing my experts. So it's only the plaintiffs bring the experts to the preliminary procedure with the judge to ask the judge about the legal strategy that they want to pursue. So this is like a consultation meeting with the judge, formal consultation with the judge. And I was told by the Dutch lawyers that, normally you can't lose this because it's, you are coming forward to the court asking them, what should we do? How should we proceed with this case? And that was, the hearing that was on July 9th, where you were there. And that's what the Peter Stassen was asking the court. And so then they had all this time, 6 weeks until August 20th, when the judge issued the decision. And the decision was to deny this procedure, which is very, very unusual in Dutch law, and very contrary to the doctrine that, you as a citizen can seek remedies if you were injured. And so, that's where we are. So we were waiting, we were anticipating that that's going to happen. And we were, thinking, so we were staying kind of quiet about this case because we didn't want to influence judge's decision. But now that she issued the decision, we can be more upfront about it and more public about it. It is likely that these 3 new victims will join the other case, so the cases will merge. I don't know, it's up to the lawyers to do that. But we're going to be more publicly speaking about the substance of our testimonies, and we're preparing a campaign about it. There are 5 experts. So I was approached amongst many people who were being asked to testify. I said, yes, there are 5 expert witnesses right now willing to testify. It's myself, Catherine Watt, my colleague. She's a legal paralegal, but deep scholar, right? Probably the most, the deepest scholar on the issues of vaccination law.
She's extraordinary, Catherine. She's absolutely extraordinary.
She has traced about 200 years of history, legal history in the US, but it also relates to international, because they're all harmonized. For specifically related to vaccinations. And so her expertise is highly valuable. Mike Eden, as you mentioned, his expertise is also highly valuable. He's was high-level executive advisor and very familiar with pharmaceutical regulations, also with toxicology. He's a very experienced toxicologist and drug designer. And the 5th expert is Joe Sansone from Florida. who is also, he's a doctor. I think he's a PhD, and he's written a lot about the law related to bioweapons. Now, there was a sixth witness, Professor Francis Boyle, who is actually expert on bioweapons, having drafted several bioweapons conventions-related laws in the U.S. And 3 weeks after he agreed to testify on behalf of the plaintiffs that these products and the process was deployment of bioweapons, he suddenly died. And we still don't know the cause of death. And the only thing that we know is he was perfectly healthy prior and was teaching full time. He was in his mid-70s. And this was a shock to all of us. And this looks very suspicious to me. I can't speculate on what happened, but I would really like to know the cause of death, and we don't know that. So that's where we are right now. This is how serious it is. These people stop at nothing. And yeah, the lawyers also told me that the court specifically excluded any recording in the court, anybody reporting about it from inside the court, and they said only approved press. But you credentialed press, and they wouldn't let you in either. Right? So.
And this is the key, Sasha. I would be happy to interview you. I've been in touch with Catherine as well, and Catherine and anybody else. I know Jim will be the same. I would be happy to do that weekly, because the protection for you of going public now is that we get the world's support behind you, and that is the one thing that will stop these people who, as you say, will stop at nothing. They do not like the people of the world standing up and seeing what they're doing. They don't like the light of truth shone on their dark deeds. So I believe that publicity now will keep you safe right through to the court case. But it is, you mentioned casually, militarized, what did you say there? A militarized campaign. You mentioned the DOD. Let's go into that right now. This Pfizer jab, this jab around the world that has caused so much maiming. We had Pfizer in New Zealand, but we have had the other companies, Moderna, AstraZeneca. These jabs root back, in your opinion, in your research, in your very grounded research, to the DOD in America, do they not, Sasha?
Yes, absolutely. So I've written extensively on this matter, and for the longest time, myself and Catherine Watt were the only people even writing about it. Then Debbie Lerman, another collaborator of ours, also joined, and we've co-published several important pieces of evidence. So the most recent one is myself and Debbie Lerman compiled what's called the COVID dossier. It's on my Substack and on her Substack, and it's basically a listing for all countries in the world for which we had this data available. And now we have pretty much every region of the world included. North America, South America, Europe, Asia. And it shows exactly the same pattern. And that was our goal, is to demonstrate to people and to journalists who want to pursue this that it is a very consistent pattern across the world, and it involves the following things. So the COVID, whatever, if you believe in virus or don't believe in virus, it's irrelevant. Whatever is COVID was early on, very early in 2020, classified by all the governments as a national security threat, or equivalent in, whatever the terminology is equivalent in those countries. In the US, it was classified as national security threat as early as February 4th, 2020. And as you remember, on that date, nothing really was going on. There were maybe some cases identified in China. And then there was maybe one PCR case in the US. And there wasn't really any significant illness or death, and that's what the data shows. There was zero of that. Yet somehow, for some reason, we still don't know why, because it's all classified now, it was declared a national security threat. And from then on, it proceeded being a military and security state operation. And so, for example, people think that this is a public health event. And that was specifically the lie that all the governments in the world in concert perpetrated on their public. Majority of people still think it's a public health event, and it was mismanaged. So the perception or imposed reality that they want you to believe in is that it was mismanaged public health event. We overreacted. There was some overreach. Maybe masking wasn't, necessary, or maybe school closures were not necessary. Let's investigate. Let's debate that for another, 5 years until the perpetrators can compare that campaign. So that's where they want you to be mentally. And what Debbie and I were saying, forget that. It has nothing to do with public health and never did. And this is the evidence. The evidence is that the lead agencies in charge of COVID response all over the world, simultaneously became not the public health agencies, not the ministries of health, not HHS, not CDC, none of those. They were all security and military apparatus. So specifically in the US, it was National Security Council in charge of COVID response. And Debbie found the documentation from the US government showing that. And she's still actually trying to FOIA the US government for how did they change the pandemic response policy from being public health to being National Security Council. So that is still secret. We still don't know when, who made these decisions, but she found a document where National Security Council is in charge of COVID response. National Security Council is the advisory body to the US president. It consists of heads of military and security state, the intelligence agencies, and vice president. It does not have any representation from health agencies on it. You have to have the highest security clearance to participate in those. So in the secret room behind and by the way, in also in many countries and in the US and in WHO, all these meetings, the high-level meetings to decide on response policies were done in extremely secure locations, locked, without those skiffs, without cell phones. It's incredible. So incredible to claim that this was about public health, right? When the decision is being made in such strict security at the highest top-level clearance, designated only for war scenarios or bioterrorism, and or chemical terrorism or whatever, the weapons of mass destruction. And so that's what we are demonstrating in our dossier. And the pattern is consistent in all the countries, in the UK, in New Zealand, in Australia, in Canada, Netherlands, we also profiled, Italy, everywhere the military brass was put in charge of what we would, in the US, it was chief operating officer of the Operation Warp Speed was the Department of Defense. Again, not public health. HHS was only advisory to the Department of Defense. And same pattern in all these other countries. So that's basically in a nutshell. People can go and read it, and they can click on the link. All of these agencies and public documentation for each country are profiled with links and sources, so you can start your own investigation from there. In addition, I also, as part of this dossier, I published a tape that I received from a whistleblower from AstraZeneca internal executive meeting at the end of 2020, where they discussed that AstraZeneca became part of the DoD consortium in 2017. They were approached by DARPA, by Colonel Matt Habern of DARPA, who was actually one of the key executives in the Operation Warp Speed as well. And there are videos of him, interviews on Pentagon website, and so forth. You can see, I also published them. And so AstraZeneca executives, specifically Pascal Soro, the CEO, and VP of monoclonal antibodies Mark Esser, discussed that Matt Habern approached them in 2017. He said, we are starting this consortium where we, the DoD, will identify pandemic potential viruses. And you, the pharma, will make vaccines and therapeutics for them in 60 days. To which Mark Esser said, my first reaction was it's science fiction. And that's a correct reaction because it is a science fiction. Matt Habern was enticing them into a fraudulent scheme by which they will fake viruses on computer and then fake the medicines which are straight poisons, because you can't, first of all, there's no science in the world today that can predict pandemic potential from a computer modeled virus. And this is very explicitly stated in scientific literature, which I also review and profile in textbooks from NIH, in publications from National Academy of Science, co-authored with Ralph Baric, by the way. They all say there is no such thing in the world. We can't look at the computer model and tell you how pandemic potential it is. We need direct experience with the virus. That's correct. You need to, in public health, you can only determine pandemics and epidemics retrospectively. You can never determine them prospectively. And so that's why Mark Esser was like, this is science fiction. Also, you can't make products, pharmaceutical products in 60 days, or you can only make poison in 60 days. And that's the fraudulent scheme involved this. The government goes to the pharma, gives them this very, thinly covered fig leaf story, weighs a lot of dollars. Pharma says, okay, offers sovereign liability protection for this through the PrEP Act. Okay. They continue working, they cook up poison, then they distribute it under the label of medicine. And in my testimony for this Dutch case, this is what I walk through. I've written about 60-page long testimony for this. I walk through all this evidence, and my conclusion is that these products designed through this scheme are indistinguishable from weapons. It doesn't matter what's in them. You can't just pick up a syringe lying on the ground and inject it into a child. You would be charged with attempted murder. And that's what it is. In a nutshell, this is what the bioweapon is.
It's extraordinary. I'm going to come to you in a moment, Jim. I'm just taking all of this in the detail, and people need to follow your Substack and read all of it. Go, if you want to research, go right through Sasha's extraordinary Substack. But Sasha, we have to ask a couple of really important things here. How much did the president know of this? At the time, the Operation Warp Speed was being sold to the world. And how much do you think the president and RFKJ know right now of what you are saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me talk about Trump first. So I've also published quite a bit of evidence on my Substack about it. I went through several Pentagon videos. I believe they're still on Pentagon website. These are press conferences from Operation Warp Speed. And in several of them, it's evident that early on, Trump was only partially briefed into this. I can't fully kind of tell you what's in his head. It's not up to me. But the evidence so far shows that, compiled by me and by others, shows that up until around March 10th, he was against lockdowns. He abruptly changed his mind around March 10th on the lockdowns. And that coincides with the visit of Tucker Carlson to Mar-a-Lago, and whatever Tucker Carlson told him convinced him to go into the lockdowns. As of March 20th, though, he's still surprised. So he authorized the Stafford Act declaration, which has never been used in this manner. It's emergency declaration across all 50 states simultaneously. And that started the whole process. He also, as of March 20th, he apparently was surprised on video by Mike Pompeo's statement that we're in a live exercise. And he's visibly surprised, and he says, you should have told us, you should have told us. And that means that he was somehow convinced to sign off on Stafford Act declaration, go to lockdowns, but then he was still under some sort of perception that this was a drill, perhaps. And so, that's what I can tell. Another piece of evidence is that it's obvious through these, my reading and looking at these videos and press conferences, that the DOD was running ahead of him all the time. They were just managing the perception such that it was his decisions. So, for example, the classification of COVID as a national security threat comes from DARPA to pharma on February 4th. And Trump is still, not even close to being okay on Stafford Act and so forth. So obviously they went ahead, and now they're dragging him in, right? And then he is dragged in, he agrees, then they surprise him again with this live exercise thing. Then probably there's another briefing and he finally is on board. From then on, though, he is fully on board and fully committed. And now he knows 100% what he's doing. As a matter of fact, right before we started recording, I looked at Twitter. He just, there's a clip of him in a video saying that, again, he's so proud of Operation Warp Speed that it was almost military operation.
Despite COVID, which was a very unfortunate situation for the whole world, we did a great job with it. Never got the credit for the job we did. Operation Warp Speed, people say, is one of the greatest achievements ever in politics or in the military, because it was almost a military procedure. But everybody, including Putin, said that Operation Warp Speed, what you did with that, nobody can believe it. And we did a great job, but it was a horrible pall over our country. We had a very dark cloud over the world. That was a very, very bad thing that came out of Wuhan, which I said it came out of Wuhan. That's where it came from. And China suffered greatly, but everybody did. But we did a good job with that, as good as you can possibly do, and we came back, and now we're stronger than ever before.
He's slowly walking the public into, oh yes, of course it was a military operation.
Wow. So and this idea of the president not being fully briefed goes right back. If you look at the JFK files, JFK knew that the Department of Defense, and there was a deep swamp that Trump has called it, a deep state within the state that was running things that often the president was not briefed on. And look where that ended for John F. Kennedy when he tried to take that on. So what are the options for a president? A president gets in, Sasha, you're saying, and finds out there is something else running all of this, and I either comply or potentially lose my life. What is going on at the upper levels of American administration?
I don't excuse Trump, and I don't think that he is naive or was naive in the first term either. I think it's simply how they normally run things, and this is simply how the deep state kind of leashes whoever is the executive right now and drags them into all this stuff. And
that's
so
what it feels like. That's what it feels like.
Exactly. And so, but now he's fully committed. He's now lying, straight through all these years. And again, under the second administration, he's fully aware of what he's doing. He's fully aware of what happened. He cannot be excused for any of it. He cannot be excused for continuing to lie into the victims' faces and continuing to authorize all this monstrosity and continue to endorse it. Now, the problem is, though, and you also asked me about RFK Jr. RFK Jr. knows 100% of this, and he knew this. I told him all this. There are videos of us discussing it on two of his podcasts in 2022 and 2023. So RFK Jr. completely knows this. And
what was his reaction when you spelt this out, Sasha? What was his reaction in those videos?
Well, you can see the video of us talking about it, and his reaction is the same as yours right now. Was in 22 and 23.
Let me just give the punchline to what you're about to tell us, which is that essentially there were a series of laws put in place that allowed the military to take over distribution of vaccines, and under a provision that does not allow any clinical trials and does not allow any safety testing. Mm-hmm. And that essentially the safety testing that we did see, which was conducted by the pharmaceutical industry, was kabuki theater put on for the public with no regulatory implications. And that's why they were able to take all these shortcuts, because it was meaningless theater. Now, I'm going to let you explain kind of the long version of that, but that's what people, that's kind of where we're going.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So it was, a pretend authorization by a regulatory agency, FDA, that has no regulatory mandate to regulate countermeasures in the United States. Remember, the FDA mandate is to regulate interstate commerce of medical products and food, right? So
they are supposed to approve medical products, and these are not medical products; they're countermeasures. So that legal framework that's being utilized here is essentially pretending that this is a health event and pretending that these are health products, while using the laws that actually put them into a totally different space legally or pseudo-legally, I would say. So in addition to the emergency use authorization, they're using another set of laws that they're allowing them to contract under other transaction authorities. So Department of Defense, and they're not just overseeing the distribution of vaccines, by the way, that was sold to the public also. They're actually, the Department of Defense is fully in charge of the development of the clinical trials, of the execution of all this manufacturing and ordering of them and distributing the money and taking the possession of the delivered product and distributing it and owning it until it is injected into a person. So they're using other transaction authority, which is a way for the government to contract. Again, initially was very narrowly defined, given authority to NASA to do it in the 60s. Now 11 government agencies are using it, and DoD is a particular frequent user of this method.
Other transaction authority is called OTA.
OTA.
And it was essentially designed to allow the Pentagon to quickly buy weapons and weapons systems without paying attention to any existing regulatory authorities.
Yes.
What they've done is they've taken that authority and they've applied it to the vaccines. So they're purchasing the vaccines under OTA as a demonstration product. It's not a medical product. So it has, FDA has no authority over it. CDC has no authority over it. Military is actually manufacturing. They've farmed this out to hundreds of military contractors to do the manufacturing, to do the distribution, to do every aspect of it. And it's all a huge military operation. And the involvement of the drug companies is kind of window dressing, because the Pentagon did not want to put on the product, this is a Pentagon-made, Defense Department-made product. They essentially paid the pharmaceutical companies for their brand name, so people would think they were getting something from Pfizer or Moderna. But all of the back room and the distribution and manufacturing is done by the military, and the pharmaceutical companies were brought in to put their name on it and then to pretend to do clinical trials which have no legal significance.
Absolutely, yeah, that's exactly right. So OTA allows them not only quickly order otherwise regulated products from regulated industry, private industry, without following the regulations. So that's critical. And that's why DoD loves it so much, because not only they can do that, they can also hide a lot of technology and IP from public, from each other, from other government branches. So it's perfect for them. And also they don't have to follow any federal procurement accounting rules. So that's why, their stated budget is, I remember, for $800 billion, but they can't find $8 trillion because they lost it and there's no accounting records for it. So that's how they do it. And they distribute humongous amounts of money through this and through their agency. So it's technically HHS agency, but it's called BARDA, Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. But BARDA kind of distributes the money. And also they've all contracted. So these contracts became available, over 400 of them, for all countermeasures, not just vaccines, but vaccines got the largest chunk of money. So it's vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, even masks were included in that. So they gave them a huge chunk of money. The scope of work of these contracts, the primary scope of work, is large-scale manufacturing demonstration. Demonstration meaning fake. It also use words sometimes prototypes, sometimes it's prototype, demo, countermeasure, large-scale manufacturing demonstration. Those are typical scope of work in these projects. And then they mention, as in a fluff language, they mention things like, oh, it's going to be subject to FDA rules and compliance. But then they also have these scope definition clauses where it says specifically out of scope, and we're not paying for it, we're not ordering it, is preclinical, clinical development, and manufacturing compliance. So that should be understood very clearly by everyone. Department of Defense gave humongous amounts of money to all these pharma companies for a demonstration, just a demonstration. And if you knew that you're going to inject your child with a Department of Defense prototype ordered under OTA and emergency use authorized, would you do it? I don't think so.
And that's normal reaction for any normal human. But it's the minute he joined Trump's campaign, it all changed. Now, I don't sit in his head. I don't know his motivations. I don't know. I personally like him. My interactions with him, both on the phone, offline, online, he appears to me sincere person. He appeared to me that he was honest about the desire to stop this, the desire to bring accountability to this. So I don't doubt that he was sincere about it. I don't doubt that he went with sincere intentions into the Trump's campaign. The problem, though, and I'm explaining this to people, I criticize him continuously now for all his actions as HHS secretary. And these actions are because he serves at the pleasure of Trump, and Trump serves at the pleasure of pharma. This is the reality. Pharma and military complex, okay? So this is the reality. People need to understand this. You can't sit here and expect that RFK Jr. or Trump will do something to change this, because this is how the structure is set up. And at the same time, also, this structure is collapsing because the US government is irrevocably broke. There's no repair to this. And so are all the other governments of the world, New Zealand and UK. And
yes. When you say broke, you're not talking financially, which they are. They're broken financially, but you're saying corrupted, aren't you? They're broken, or both?
They've always been corrupted. Corruption is given in government. But while, in the years prior and decades prior, when money was plentiful, the corruption is there. People know about it, but it's covered up by a layer of, everybody feels financially secure, economy is more or less good, you feel like everything is going fine. And so when the money is there, it's hidden, and they have enough energy and enough money to construct veneer of democratic process and veneer of everything is the justice and so forth. When the money starts going down, you see the ugly bottom. Okay.
Yes. And when the truth starts to bubble up, you see even more ugliness, because these people are now rats in a corner, Jim, aren't they? What's your reaction listening to this incredibly important overview from Sasha? Jim Ferguson.
Well, first of all, I think we should go back to the court case for a moment, because there is something very important that's not been discussed yet. And it's the fact that the Dutch government changed the law in January of this year as far as witnesses are concerned. And what they did was they made it difficult to for those who are looking to bring justice into the court with their witnesses. So effectively what they've done, if the defendants don't agree with the witnesses that the prosecution is trying to bring in, now they can say, well, we don't agree with those witnesses, in which case the court will say, well, we can't proceed with it. Now, you can imagine in any set of circumstances, in any trial, criminal or otherwise, if evidence is being presented, if expert witnesses or even just witnesses themselves, if the defendants don't like those witnesses, they can say, well, we don't agree with them. I mean, you can never get justice. You can never get justice. So the fact that it was just changed in January this year is highly significant. And it's something that Micah ter Horst brought up in an interview, which I think you're probably going to pin to this one, where she went into detail about how that happened and the ramifications of it. In relation to what happened during the pandemic, I think that a lot of us were disappointed to see the way it was rolled out, but there was a very deep psychological operation that was in effect. And I've interviewed many professors and scientists and doctors who have a deep understanding of all of this. And it had all the hallmarks of a psychological operation, which is a military term for mass manipulation. And I think those were some of the charges that were actually being leveled at the likes of Gates and Bourla and others in this particular case. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is the fact that we had two people, Birx, the scarf lady, one of the advisors to Trump at the time, and Anthony Fauci. And we see Anthony Fauci in all sorts of trouble right now because he said so many things that have been proven to be not just inaccurate, but downright lies. And he is on the ropes, so to speak, and they're really going after him. Senator Rand Paul in particular is very much on his case. Now, I'm not making excuses for President Trump, but I will say if you're in a position of that level, you are really dependent on those around you to give you advice. You can't be all-knowing and all-knowledgeable in all things. Unfortunately, it looks like the globalist orders made sure that they had their key people in place closely around him. So that may very well have given them the steer, because I think Sasha's right. He was definitely against the lockdowns. He didn't want to do it because he is a businessman, first and foremost. And business people understand if you start imposing lockdowns, that's not good for business. So he was highly resistant to it. Now, I have no idea what Tucker Carlson may have said to him, or if what happened with that. But once again, if you're in a position where you're relying on people to give you a direction, then you have to take their advice on board, even if it's bad advice. And I think in the case of Birx in particular, but also Tony Fauci, the advice that was given was definitely bad advice. And there are all sorts of things with NIH being linked back to Wuhan and China, and vast sums of money that was donated. I think the Chinese were involved in this. Certainly there was money from USAID. There was lots of funding going into this. So you're talking big money and a lot of money that would have been going into the pockets of certain people involved in this. I think corruption has played a huge part in this. But yes, I've had many guests who have linked it back to the Department of Defense. This was a military operation that had been long in the planning. It's not something that just happened. It was done with military precision. And that's why the mainstream media, every president, prime minister, every leader of every country came out in lockstep at the same time with exactly the same policies. The question for me is, who's at the top of the tree giving those orders? Who's the one or who's the group? Because there has to be somebody that's pulling the strings. Who is it that has so much power that they can command presidents, kings, in our case, in the UK, and others to go along with such a draconian lockdown when there was no evidence to suggest that this was needed? And looking back, absolutely, it was something that was definitely not needed. So there is a lot of unanswered questions. And I think it is coming out bit by bit. I hope that this court case, whether it's merged into the one court case now, as it sort of suspected will happen, may still yet shed light. But when you've got the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who's now heading up NATO, with the specialist police that arrested Arno van Kessel that are linked in and work effectively for NATO, and then the laws being changed at the last minute in January without any good reason, then it makes people wonder what on earth is going on. So I think to sort of summarize it for you, Liz, yeah, there's a lot of things that have still to come out, but people are waking up. The information war is being won through independent media like yours and what Sasha's reporting on as well. So full credit to both of you and others who are basically shining a light onto this darkness, and it is a darkness. Anybody that would take a decision to deliberately harm millions, potentially billions of people around the planet is on a whole other scale of evil, and there's no other way to describe it.
And Jim, credit to your international platform, Freedom Train International. Your whole purpose is to get the truth out, as is mine, as is Sasha's. But I need to take that further. It's a very good reply, Jim. That change to the law in the Netherlands back in January, clearly they are now preparing the way for lies and suppression of truth through lawfare, Sasha. So I want to come to that in a moment. But let's take another point Jim raised first. Who is behind it, and why would the Department of Defense, the DOD, DARPA, why would the people at the very top of that very fetid organization, are very corrupted now, why do they want to hurt the people of the world? Why do they want to see us maimed and dying prematurely? What do you think their motivation is, and who are they, Sasha, in your opinion? In your research?
Right. So just this week, yesterday, I published an article discussing some of these motivations. And in my personal approach, I like to stay close to the crime scene. I don't want to jump too far away from it. So you have to walk back very methodically from here's the body, who injected, who told the injector to inject, how did you arrive at the DOD as the chief operating officer. Okay, we've covered that. The next step for me is why is this in the interest? So what we found together with Catherine Watt, with her help, because she's traced all this relevant law in the U.S., the so-called communicable disease law goes back way back to late 1700s, and from the very beginning, and let's say starting somewhere in the late 1800s, this kind of language starts appearing, especially from early 20th century. We have this language appearing that, hey, we have a U.S. Constitution, we have, freedom, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all that. We have amendments that protect our rights as citizens. In the U.S., the Constitution is probably the most robust legal document, ostensibly protecting the rights of people against the government, as it should. And we have the right, the First Amendment, Second Amendment. We have the right to sue in court, seek remedies. Nobody can dispossess us of property, and so forth. However, there's always
can I just stop you there for a moment? I want people to really sit with what you've just said. This American Constitution is hailed as the greatest experiment by humankind to allow the most people the most freedoms and democracy. And when you really start to comprehend that, I believe even the people who have been brainwashed by the legacy media in America into being far left and hating their own country and running down their constitution. You need to really sit quietly with how important a treasure your constitution is. It is an extraordinary experiment, and it's hailed as such. And just like Christianity, it seems, Sasha, the powers that be are determined to try to separate humanity from God and from the principles that lie at the root of this extraordinary experiment that is the American Constitution.
Exactly, correct. And this whole exercise, so as my colleague Catherine was tracing this law, and I'm reading it, and she's reading it, and we're discussing it, what became very apparent is that they always, for the long time, over 100 years at least, the U.S. government explicitly carved out all of this Constitution is all good, except when we, the government, say that we have a compelling interest to override it. And the most compelling, and the most often when they override it, is the compelling interest that they claim is communicable disease prevention. And so this communicable disease prevention language have always been used as an excuse to violate Constitution for the government and to gain access to every human, every child's body specifically. And so this is just a continuation of all that trend. Now, the way the law is written, and even the reason I published this article is because there was a letter circulated from Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights Actually, I didn't know they had, but they have an Office of Civil Rights, and this office sent a letter to governor of the health department, of West Virginia, one of the states, saying, because West Virginia has this really draconian compulsory vaccination law, and so the letter sounded at the opening like a good thing. They were saying stuff like, if you're not recognizing the constitutional rights of West Virginians, your federal funding is in jeopardy. And I was like, wow, this is great. And then they have on second page, this compelling government interest language comes in play. And also it's compelling government interest in the least restrictive way, which is vaccination. So that's how they, manage this. And now the people are asking me, well, okay, why is it in the interest of the United States to hurt all the people, especially children? Because you need growing population for economic growth. You need the more younger workers versus the retirees for the Social Security to work. And those economic theories are saying that government is always interested in increasing population and in the healthy population, right? Now, that's true in theory. In practice, in the US, because of essentially over 100 years of this vaccination, especially since the late 80s, when the National Vaccine Injury Act came in place, the CDC schedule exploded. So now, before there were maybe 3-4 shots, then 5 shots. Now we have 90 shots. Now they're adding on, in addition to the vaccines, they're also adding on monoclonal antibodies for newborns, for all newborns, which are not vaccines. So the injection schedule blew up. As a result, 75% of the US population is chronically ill. About 65% of children are chronically ill. Most become disabled very early. The disability skyrocketed, especially disability rate skyrocketed after the rollout of COVID shots. Ed Dowd actually published really good data on this. And what I'm saying is, while economic theory tells you're interested in the growing population, if 3 out of 4 of your newborns are going to become disabled and go on a government dole, as a government, you're not interested in the growth of that population. It's a net drain on your budget. No matter how fast, the faster it grows, the faster you're going to go bankrupt. That's why they're interested in reducing the population. It's a compelling government interest, and the least restrictive way is to continue to vaccinate.
That's extraordinary. And so then we look at Canada and MAID, where they are rolling out now this euthanasia to even teenagers. Oh, you're depressed? Try dying early. And this is what they're experimenting with in Canada. So we are truly run by a death cult, one could say, a cult that wants. What do they want in terms of the population of the world, in your view, Sasha? What numbers would satisfy them? Some people say Gates, whose father was a well-known eugenicist, wanted reduced population, that 500 million is the number. What do you understand it to be?
Well, those numbers are, so the most important number for the government bureaucrats is not necessarily the number of people, it's the life expectancy. Because life expectancy, as a statistic, it drives their economic models. And life expectancy reduction can be achieved in 2 ways. Either people live shorter lives and don't stay in the retirement for a very long time, if at all, or you reduce the birth rate. And it seems to me that they're going after both vectors. If you noticed, their most aggressive campaigns have always been targeted at people over 65 and pregnant women and babies. Those are their 2 main targets. It means that they're working on that statistic, reduction of the life expectancy. How many people they're going to end up with, I don't know. And I also think that this whole AI push of, claiming that AI is going to replace all the workers and all that, I think it's actually kind of a secondary. So because I know how these people kind of interact between themselves, they'll go and tell, so Trump needs to restructure government debt. So he goes and says, well, here are my projections for the next 75 years. By the way, they're published. I published them with my article. So U.S. government projects for the next 75 years, this is going to be the expenditure, the deficit. This is how much money I need to raise selling treasuries, and the banker or whoever is facilitating this, the bankers will push back and say, no, your number is not good enough. So you gotta go figure out a better number. To figure out a better number, you need to reduce the life expectancy, which means you're going to reduce the population. But then they're going to say, well, what about the economy? Who's going to be And don't worry about that. Here's Sam Altman and Peter Thiel and whoever, they're going to code this amazing thing, AI, and it's going to be doing everything. So that's how the pitch goes. And from then on, you can understand why they're doing what they're doing.
I was talking to a scientist in the Philippines who says she travels to China, Sasha, and she said to me, looking out her hotel window in a large town not too far from Shanghai, she had a co-worker in Shanghai, both of them comparing notes, saying the streets are so empty. So what they understand is there has been this huge population drop in China, but it's being covered. It's being covered up, as is potentially an interesting change of leadership in China. Are you hearing either of those stories out of China? And I ask about China because I believe the West is being based on China, that they're looking at what China's doing. They're slightly ahead of us. Is there any truth in that, in your view?
They certainly like the Chinese model. By they, I mean the bankers and Trump. The Chinese model, as far as the degree of the control that the government has, is very appealing to them, because also they can convince each other and themselves that this is for the greater good. Because look, in China they can direct the banks to do this and that, and it's true. It's partially true that banking drives a lot of impact on the economy of the society, the banking system that's being used. In fact, I highly recommend, while I'm not a fan of Tucker Carlson too much, but he does have occasionally great guests. And I highly recommend the recent interview he did with Richard Werner, who is an economist, who's based in Japan for a long time. I don't know if he's still based there. Amazing guy. And his interview with Tucker Carlson is extremely revealing in this regard. So he states, and this is true, that it's not the central banks and it's not the government monetary policy that creates the money supply. It's actually the banks that issue loans that create money supply. Because banks just manufacture money out of thin air. Banks have a license to commit fraud.
Yes.
by just adding infinite number of lines to the balance sheet is every time they issue the loan. This is how the money is infused into the economy. And China, because they control banks completely, the government controls the system of banks completely, has a lot of ease of implementing this mechanism of control. And so for that reason, and it could be productive, it could be useful if it's used properly. But when it's misused, like normally, all over the world, it creates havoc and economic collapse. And so that's why they're looking to China to say, I want to have a much more controlling mechanism because my system is failing. The empire is crumbling. So Trump is fighting with the Fed about interest rates. If he had a Chinese model, he would have no problem like this at all. And that's what's appealing. And then the population control, obviously, because China controls people completely. People's actions, small businesses, their economy is a hybrid of communism and capitalism, actually, in a funny way. And so they look at China and they think it's amazing. That's why they're so in love with this model.
And that is through the digital ID, the central bank digital currency. If you don't do exactly what they want, you're sleeping on the street on a mattress and you're out of society in China. Mm-hmm. Are you hearing anything about Xi Jinping's leadership, that there is another faction that is seeking to come up and that potentially Xi Jinping is not well either? Are you hearing anything of that through your networks?
I don't know.
That's slightly an aside, but still, it is the model, as you say, that they want to follow. Jim, when you're listening to what Sasha's saying here, what views are you adding into what you already know?
Well, clearly the World Economic Forum are very much in favour of the Chinese model, and we see the use of digital ID being used extensively. So people in China have to have these apps on their phone. If somebody within the State Department doesn't like something they've done or said, then they get their credit score downgraded, and it can be 1 or 2 points, or it can be a lot of points, to the point where supermarket doors won't open. They can't get through barriers, they can't get through turnstiles. Some of them live in gated communities, and some actually can't even then get into their own apartments because they've got to scan the QR code to get access to their own homes.
And everywhere they go, they have facial recognition, Jim, which they're trying to bring in the UK and New Zealand right now. Everywhere in China, it's facial recognition, isn't it?
Yes, and in London, there is a big plan to roll out facial recognition right across the city here. So there is a move for much, much increased surveillance. And I think one of the things a lot of people say, well, there's more of us than there is of them. The globalists are very much aware of that, and they've been very much aware of that for a long time, which could be another reason why they've decided they don't want as many people around, because they're hard to manage, they're hard to control. And if they do rise up, then that could be a problem for their security forces. With a much, much smaller, reduced population, it makes their totalitarian controls far easier than trying to deal with billions. If you've got 500 million, which I think is probably their ideal figure, although, I mean, Professor Dennis Meadows, in a rather infamous clip on YouTube a few years ago, in a very mild way said, well, we just can't sustain 7 or 8 billion people. And he hopes, in his own words, he wanted a peaceful resolution to it. In other words, people commit suicide peacefully because they want to. And this is what we're seeing rolled out with the maid service in Canada, assisted dying. And we've seen this being put to the parliaments in Australia and, of course, in the United Kingdom as well. So I think the earlier point that Sasha made about the population models, they don't like the elderly because they see them as useless eaters, I guess. They don't want people probably past 45 or 50 because they think they're deemed unproductive. And I would agree with the comments also, Sasha, about when you talk about they don't want people living too long either. So if they fill people's bodies with enough of these mRNA shots, whatever they might be, whatever they contain, then that's going to have a massive effect on people's health. So once again, there is an active depopulation agenda, in my opinion, and certainly in the opinions of many scientists and professionals that I interview and talk to on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. The question is, it goes back to what is the end game? Well, the actual end game is that they don't want national governments. They don't want independent countries like Hungary or the United Kingdom. They want vassal states of a one world global order that they control. And that's why you see attacks on taking a step back from this a little bit. It's why you see attacks on sovereignty, on national pride, on flying the colours and flying the flags. They don't like that. So that's a multi-spectrum warfare on humanity right now that they've declared, and it's been declared actually a long time ago. So children and education is a big attack for them because they get hold of young children and they start to corrupt their minds with LGBT, trans ideology, and turning them against their mothers and fathers, their communities, their countries, saying that they should be ashamed to be white British and what terrible things the British Empire did and all that kind of thing. And they do this in every country. They do it in America, they do it in New Zealand, they do it in Australia. So this is a huge battleground that we face. And what we're witnessing in the Lusvarden courthouse is just a small part of a much, much bigger picture. And what we're doing in Freedom Train International is telling the truth and getting the truth out there. But another very important part of all of this is to get people ready for the coming storm, because there is a storm that's coming. Our economies are going to get tanked. There will probably be countries that will go bankrupt. The fallout will be enormous. We are seeing engineered chaos through mass illegal immigration coming right across Western nations. Thankfully, thanks to President Trump, he put an immediate stop to that when he got into office. When I spoke to Senator Ron Johnson last time I was in Washington, D.C., he said it's the most pressing concern of all, the southern border. And that's now been fixed there pretty much. But the English Channel is wide open. And it's not that we have incompetent leaders. It's actually far worse than that. They are complicit. They are globalist infiltrators. Keir Starmer is a globalist. He's on record at having chosen Davos over Westminster. So people need to understand it's not that our leaders are stupid. They're not. That it's far worse. They are complicit. They are against the people in the countries. And Ardern was one of the worst in New Zealand. Dan Andrews in the state of Victoria, another WEFer, absolutely despicable man. Trudeau in Canada. I mean, the list is extensive. And Biden didn't know what time of day it was most of the time. I think it was Otto Penn that was signing most of his, or should I say Obama, who was probably programming the Otto Penn to sign away the policies that he was doing. So it's a much bigger picture in all of this, but it is all about surveillance. It's all about control. It's all about reducing the numbers of people to a manageable level. And they've hijacked the whole climate agenda. Even the previous leaders of Greenpeace have said their movement was hijacked by globalists. And now they're indoctrinating young people in school, primary schools, about saving the planet, reducing carbon, and using language which actually, if you understand their language when they talk about reducing carbon, we are the carbon that they want to reduce. So it's very, very worrying, very frightening. But in what we're doing in our organization is we are revealing it, but we're also giving people the solutions to prepare for possibly what might happen is a parallel society where people do not go along with the digital ID, the CBDCs. We're encouraging people to grow their own food, to live independent lifestyles, to build local networks of sport with specialist talents and abilities, dentists, doctors, police officers, farmers, food producers, car mechanics, all the kind of people that you would need in a community, and build up those networks because it's going to be needed. And I don't think we're talking 25, 30 years down the line. We're probably only talking another 2 to 3 years before we see the fallout really happening. And the other thing to bear in mind in all of this is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030. We're only about, 4.5 years away, or thereabouts from Agenda 2030, when they want a complete totalitarian lockdown of the planet. You will not be allowed to leave your gated community, your 15-minute smart city. Geofencing, if you try to go to another town, village, or city without authorization, your payment systems won't work because it's going to be geofenced. You're going to be confined to your 15-minute city. And I think what we're witnessing in Canada with these extraordinary mandates, these climate lockdowns that are happening, is extraordinary, where people can't walk their dog, they can't go fishing, they can't go into the woods or the forests, or they face $50,000 fines per person. You imagine a family of 3 or 4 or 5 going out, getting caught. They're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this is what we're witnessing. This is what we're facing. And people need to wake up and they need to start getting ready pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Sasha, your reaction to that, what an extraordinary overview there. I mean, we see Ed Miliband just the other day, Jim, saying all cars will be electric. And of course, with an electric car, it can be locked in centrally to a system that can be turned off. You won't be allowed to go in your car anywhere they don't want. Geofencing, if we see it with animals, they regard us really, Sasha, as a form of animal life to be herded, do they not?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And again, this comes from the communicable disease ideas of eugenesis. It's eugenics ideas fundamentally. And I've also referred to somebody published on Substack a really good article about Robert Koch, this prominent, virologist, German scientist. Well, apparently he ran concentration camps in Africa, rounding people up with military force to be experimented on for his science on communicable disease prevention. And somehow, it was okay to do that. And now they're using the same mentality on all of us. We're a resource to be rounded up and used for organ harvesting, for data harvesting, for, making people sick and profit off of sickness, such as, turbo cancers and all these diseases, and then continue doing experimentations and research on them and patent it. And it's a gigantic operation, which actually, as I was describing, it has an internal conflict. So the corporations that fund the government, whom currently Trump serves, are interested in harvesting from humans all sorts of things, data, health, DNA, whatever.
Are you talking BlackRock? Are you talking BlackRock and the
Well,
others,
yeah, so
Vanguard?
BlackRock, Vanguard, whoever owns these companies, Pfizer, all the pharma companies, all the healthcare systems, they're all being fed by, for example, a transgender surgery is $1 million. And, I've had firsthand accounts from people who work in the healthcare that, for example, in San Francisco, they do transgender surgeries on homeless. Can you imagine? They pick them up in Golden Gate Park, do the surgery, dump them there with drugs. Because it's profitable for the system to do that. And whoever funded the local government in power, which includes these huge, powerful hospital systems, makes sure that this is not getting prosecuted or anything. This is okay. So this is just an example. And they do this to children. So it's hugely profitable for these feeders on the human flesh to do that. Now, it conflicts with the general government budget, as I said, because now we have completely poisoned and disabled population growing. And this comes into conflict, and the government needs to reduce it. So this is their process of, we want more flesh. And the government says, well, I can't quite maintain so much cattle for you. I need to reduce the size because my resources are running out. That's what's going on. And this is why they want the system of totalitarian control, because that will make it more efficient for the flesh eaters and the suppliers of flesh to operate. This is exactly what they're doing. And their plans involve, for example, today also on X, unfortunately, RFK Jr. Makes this wonderful announcement that now you're going to be able to see all your health records on your cell phone. To which everyone should say no, thank you, no, thank you. If I can see my records on my cell phone, it means Peter Thiel has direct access to my health records and Palantir, and they can target me for this geofencing and this. Oh, you're not up on your vaccination. You can't go and buy pizza now. So this kind of stuff. That's exactly their plan.
And for people who think, well, I'm fine with that, you have no idea where that data will end up if it's online. You have no idea where your private health information will end up, in China or wherever. Yeah. This truly has echoes of anyone who's read history of Mengele and the experiments he started under the Nazis on human beings. And we look back at that history horrified, and yet it is happening in real time, Sasha. So we did talk about the why they want to reduce the population, but we never truly discussed the who that Jim raised. Who do you think is at the top of this absolutely rotten mountain of corruption of what it is to be part of humanity? Who is really leading the DOD or DARPA or, the politicians we now know are puppets? We now see that the WHO, who we thought, Gates might be at the head of it, he is merely another puppet. Who is behind the scenes?
Well, I kind of, it's a speculative, guessing game. Not knowing as much as I do about complex systems and how they function, both corporate and government, a lot of it is actually self-driven. So by self-driven, I mean without central leadership. The system, because of the way it operates, as I discussed, these groups are interested in more of a sickness, and these groups are also interested to a point, because at some point they can't sustain this anymore. And but these groups hire government, so it's a cartel. So you have to think about it as a sophisticated cartel containing private interests and government, although it's kind of a fake government. They're there to make a veneer of democratic process. Their primary role is centralization of resources, distribution of these resources preferentially to their corporate backers, and then supplying government liability shield and law enforcement and all that, military as enforcement. So this is how this cartel works. Now, a lot of this cartel operates on self-interest like this. So they're all understanding internally their interests, and they will act on this. And they will, for example, they will support the vaccination policies. They will support policies funding new mRNA shots. So they'll do it without central memo coming in and saying you must do this. Most of the time, most of the system will do it by itself. There may be, ultimately the most powerful individuals in that system, in my guess, would be the ones who are controlling the central banking system. Because the central banking system is, as I said, it's a unique power. It's the most powerful thing in the world. It's like you're controlling the source of money. If you're controlling the source of money, then you have the ultimate power. And those are unfortunately secret, because the central banks have, boards of directors and memberships. The membership is secret. People who are visibly, governors and so forth, they're just executives. They're hired help. Whoever the private owners of the secret of the central banks is secret all over the world. But it's secret, but you also know that these are very powerful, rich families that go centuries back to the creation of the central banks. So it's not very hard to guess. It's like Rothschilds, Rockefellers, these kinds of actors. There probably are DuPonts and, others. And so that would be my guess as to who ultimately pulls the strings. Now, individual Rockefeller may not be even aware of this. But there are some people who are.
When I was traveling around for the last election, we'd started a small party trying to take New Zealand back. I thought we could be the experiment. This will be easy. We're only 5 million. New Zealanders will wake up quickly. We'll take the country back. We'll show people what freedom looks like. Boy, was I naive. Somebody approached me and said, Liz, that each country is divided and ruled by either of those two families. And New Zealand is a Rothschild country. A very interesting idea that each country is the plaything of either or. But and the Bank of International Settlements, look that up for people who are watching. Look up who heads it. He looks like Mr. Creosote, doesn't he, Jim? Out of Monty Python. He literally looks like the man who has gobbled up.
I wasn't ready for that. You caught me off guard there. Yeah, but you're right.
Don't have that last peppermint. But however, they look as if they've gobbled up the world. Larry Fink has this look of a man who can gobble up anything in the world. It's no longer about the amount of money. They've got more money than they can possibly spend. If they spent billions every day, they couldn't spend enough. So is it ultimately the lust for power? Is it the seduction of, I just want, Sasha, to have more power than anybody else, and I want to die thinking I have?
It's not, if for these people, it's not about money, because they can always print more money for themselves. They don't need more money. They control the source of money. It's not about money for them. It's about control and staying in control of the world forever. What they're mostly afraid of is the uprising from the bottom. So they are afraid of people coming up unmarried, somebody bright coming up, starting a business, becoming rich, and who they cannot control, and starting acting. I was discussing it with some colleagues. A lot of their culture and beliefs and all these, satanic rituals and things, it may be partially because they're evil, but partially it's also about control. It's ultimately about control. They want a very tight group that nobody ever falls out. And because these are families, they go through centuries and generations. Every generation is a threat. The new generation is a threat to this, because just as like in any family, a parent is somewhat tyrannical. You have, because you're in charge of the baby, and the baby can't quite make decisions. So you are actually, tyrannical to baby in some respects. Now, when the baby grows up, if it's a normal family, it's fine. If it's a rich family, think about it. They control billions in assets, maybe trillions even. One of their heirs somehow disagrees with the parents, has a different idea. Maybe he's freedom-minded. Maybe he wants to build, things that these people disapprove of. Maybe so all sorts of things can happen. And now he's in charge of a lot of assets, a lot of power. That's what they're afraid of primarily, is actually their own group splintering and now starting to fight the other group. That number one. And number two is uprising from the bottom. So you don't want to create they are afraid of a free competitive market, most of all, because free competitive market will, in a lot of people, 8 billion people in the world, a lot of talent can emerge naturally, yes, and that can undermine their power. So that's why they're so top down and especially when things start going south, like now, that's they're desperate. And now what you're going to see is they're going to be factions. So the cartel that's behind Trump is going to fight the cartel that's behind whatever is alternative, Democrats or whoever. And it's the same in all the other countries. So those cartels are going to start visibly separating now, because before it was uniparty. Now it's going to start visibly separating, and they're actually going to start fighting each other. And that's what we're about to see.
Yes, but who pulls the strings of both cartels? It's still that murky group behind. Is that right?
It's a murky group behind, but because there are multiple families there, again, yes, there's opportunity for division.
Something to happen. So was that what happened, the splintering with John F. Kennedy? He was starting to see there's all this murky, dark swamp behind. I don't like it. I'm going to stand up. I'm the president. I'm going to speak out. And my second part to that question, Sasha, is will his own nephew, while he's enmeshed in this swamp, start to get to the same point his uncle got to? This is too corrupt. This is too foul. This is too secretive, and I'm going to blow the lid on it. Do you think, from your viewing of RFKJ, he has the gumption, the courage, the manliness to actually take it all away and complete the job his uncle was murdered for starting off?
Well, it's a great question. I honestly don't know. I don't know him well enough. As I said, I've interacted with him. I think he was sincere about his ideas about vaccines and so forth. But yes, it's true that the same history was roughly the same history was around JFK and RFK Sr., father of RFK Jr., was Attorney General under JFK, and they both were fighting drug cartels.
Yes.
At the time, and also fighting the deep state was collaborating with drug cartels. And ultimately, the deep state eliminated them. And I certainly don't wish this to happen to RFK. And I know he is acutely aware of this situation. So I hope, and I've been recommending, people asked me several times, because I'm very critical of MAHA overall. I think MAHA policy was designed by the deep state, by pharma lobbyists, Callie Means and Susie Wiles, and who's chief of staff of Trump. And it's designed to protect pharma, protect vaccines. So I've been very critical about MAHA policy from day one. And people accuse me of, you're splintering the movement, and you're not supportive of RFK, you're not supportive of all this. I am very supportive. Unfortunately, though, as I said, he's in this situation where it is the government operates on behalf of pharma. I don't know. Maybe he didn't know this. It's quite possible. It takes a lot of digging, and for busy people and people who are professionally working in very high power positions, they don't have time, and nobody tells them, and they're surrounded by people who either lying to them or just yes men. And, so he probably didn't realize exactly how this works, but he probably will come to that realization. I think there's been some tension between him and Trump on these issues. There've been some minor moves. I have been telling people, who are criticizing me and asking me, well, what do you propose? What can he do? He can't just ban the mRNA shots because Trump will fire him. That's true. However, there's a lot of time. I wasn't even proposing to ban mRNA at all. I was proposing to just tell the truth to the public about the status, as we've described. So, for example, actually the PrEP Act, which they're using to commit this crime, also obligates them to tell the victims, the potential victims, disclose to people who are accepting the countermeasures all the known risks about countermeasures. And first of all, nobody in MAHA will even utter the word countermeasure because they want it hidden. They won't acknowledge that PrEP Act is the key to this. And this is part of the disclosure that they're not giving and violating this law. And the disclosure also needs to include that countermeasures are not subject to pharmaceutical regulations and it's okay to lie about them. Those key disclosures need to be given. And that once you start communicating the truth, which the law obligates you to do, then even the completely brainwashed COVIDians may start paying attention and thinking about it.
Sasha, just explain that more deeply. It's okay to lie about the jabs. Just explain that for people who have no idea about that.
Right. So the US law specifically says that on the conditions of public health emergency announced by Health and Human Services Secretary, which is currently RFK Jr., and this announcement is continuing until December 2029. So under the conditions of this announcement, the HHS and FDA can issue emergency use authorizations for countermeasures. EUA only exists for countermeasures. There is no other EUA in the US law. Only for countermeasures under public health emergency. And when you issue a countermeasures are not subject to pharma regulations. So the law says they shall not be deemed adulterated or misbranded under no circumstances. If something shall not be deemed adulterated or misbranded, it means no pharmaceutical law applies. Because pharmaceutical law is designed to make products unadulterated and properly branded. Now, misbranded also means you can lie about it.
That is extraordinary. And that ties in with Obama pulling back the act that stopped the American people being able to be propagandized. The rest of us are propagandized around the world. But there is this acceptance within the administration of lying to the people and propagandizing the people. It's shocking, Jim. Are you aware of that? It basically lying is sanctioned under the EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization. Jim,
yes, lying is sanctioned, but you are obligated to disclose the risk. And then the fact that somebody can lie to you about a medical product is a huge risk that they're not communicating to the public. And that's my number one action point for RFK Jr. is to offer this full disclosure. Jim,
your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, when we bore into it, my reaction is this: we at this point in time, if you look back, it almost sounded like Clinton there at this point in time. What does it matter, or something so crazy that she said? But at this point, several years after what we've seen, if people haven't wised up to the fact that mRNA shots are lethal, and if they haven't woken up to the fact, then they probably never will. So I think what we all of us in the movements that we've been linked into, our primary mission is and still is to wake up people as much as possible. But that is effectively, it's coming to the tail end, I would say, because what's going to happen next is that people who don't get it, they don't have the critical thinking. They don't have the minds. It's not about intelligence. One of the first things I always do, for example, if I was interviewing somebody about their experiences during COVID, was to ask them, when did you first notice the red flags? How early on was it? I noticed something very peculiar at the end of December 2019. I started to research as early as that. But the thing is, some people just will never wake up. They are beyond. They're incapable of it, and it's not about intelligence. So all of the stuff about Trump, all the stuff about RFK, all the stuff about all of this, right? It becomes immaterial because those people that are in charge are extremely powerful, but they are actually afraid. Sasha said something very interesting a little while ago. They actually are terrified, and they're terrified of their power coming to an end, and it is going to come to an end. And I've alluded to this particular date of 2030. It's almost like I have a big interest in military history, especially medieval history and things that happened in Europe and the UK and all over the place. What used to happen was when an invading force were coming in, they would get all their peasants, all their farmers, all their people inside the castle walls. And sometimes they would just effectively lock it all down so that if anybody then appeared in a designated area, they would be treated as if they were a spy coming in for advanced surveillance of the incoming army. And it was usually done out of fear. These globalist orders, and they are highly competitive, they don't like each other. The Council of 300, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the Weffers, there is no love lost between them. They all compete for power. But ultimately, what is going to happen is there's going to be two sets of people, a little bit like during the pandemic. There will be people that get it and say there's just no way in hell that they're coming and putting a needle in my arm. And then you're going to have people who will be browbeaten, coerced, lied to, believe, psyoped, whatever it is, who will go along with it. I'm talking central bank digital currencies, digital ID, all the rest of it. But there will be a hardcore of people, maybe not that many, depends. We shall see, who will say, there's no way I'm going to do this, and they will resist. Mm-hmm. But I think ultimately they are afraid. They're afraid of the for the right reasons that Sasha said, but they're afraid of something else. They're afraid of something else that's greater than them. And they're terrified. They're absolutely terrified because what they've done, they're going to lose everything forever. You cannot commit those kind of crimes against children and human beings and not pay the price. The ultimate price is you lose your soul. I'm sorry to say it. And I know you don't like Tucker Carlson. I actually do like him. And I think that one of the things he said in a recent interview, when I say recent, maybe a month or two ago, I did post it up and it got a lot of attention, was when he said that there was non-human intelligence involved with the governments of the world. Now, what did he mean by that? What did he mean by that? Well, we're getting into a slightly different area, and people who don't have faith, who are not Christians, who don't have any kind of belief system will struggle with this. Their minds will instantly shut down as soon as I say that. They will find it difficult to even comprehend. But there is something to it, because anybody that goes along and commits evil like that has to be doing it for a reason. And perhaps they are just so deluded into thinking that the way to remain in power is to kill the vast majority of humanity. There is such a thing as evil, and there is such a thing as the power of good. And I think these people are almost getting boxed into a corner because of the generational things that their families have done. And I think they're about to lose everything. And I think this is a last gasp attempt to lock the planet down, get everybody under control, reduce the population, introduce dystopian totalitarian systems like what we're seeing in communist China with the CCP. But what I would say to people is this: you don't have to go along with it. You got to be strong, you got to stand firm, and you've got to be not fearful. So the way to not be afraid is to get ready and prepared. As we say in Freedom Train International, don't be scared, be prepared. How do you get prepared? Well, we teach you how to do that. So ultimately, stepping back just for one moment and looking at this from a strategic point of view, what is going to happen will happen. But we've tried to wake up as many people around the world as we can. The emphasis now is going on to those who are awake, who do get it, to start getting ready to resist and to survive whatever storm comes. But there is a storm coming of unbelievable proportions. And that's not being said to frighten people, but you do need to understand it's time to get oil in your lamps. You've got to get ready. You've got to get prepared, because it is coming. And it will be societal. It will be economic. It will be on all fronts. And it will catch a lot of people by surprise, unfortunately. So we can't save everybody, but we try, and we're still trying. But I think, from my point of view, people need to understand that we can talk to our relatives, we can talk to our friends, we can talk to our neighbors like we did during the pandemic, and they're still going to get that shot. They're still going to get the digital IT. They're still going to go along with that system. There's nothing you can do about that. You can try and try and try. We saw families divided at Christmas time because of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Entire families ripped apart, that some are still not on talking terms because of it. That's the deep level of the psychological operation that was perpetrated against the people of this planet. And it's going to happen again. We're starting to see it with the climate lockdowns in Canada. If they get away with doing that in Nova Scotia and other parts of other provinces in Canada, it will probably come to the rest of the world as well. It's a test bed. It's almost like a test case for them. So they'll keep pushing and pushing for as long as they can. They'll keep pushing the boundaries. And some people will get it and some people won't. But at the end of the day, it's about understanding that we have the power ourselves to resist to look after our families, to educate our own children. I mean, I was on just on Saturday, had a great discussion about homeschooling and homeschooling your children, getting them out of the education system, because actually it's not education, it's indoctrination. It's indoctrination camps. Homeschooling has been outlawed in Germany and Sweden, and they're trying to outlaw it in the UK. But while you still can, get your children out of that state school, because it's doing them nothing but harm. And you don't need to be a teacher. You don't need to have gone to university. You don't need to have degrees to teach your children at home. It's not that hard to do. So there's a lot of things going on. But I just felt it was time to take a little step back and then come at it from that. But yeah, that's sort of my reaction to it, Liz.
Jim, that's so beautifully said. And that was his discussion, Sasha, was with Alex Newman, one of the very few journalists that I truly admire and look up to, such a truth teller. Alex used the phrase, if you have your children in school, you don't go, and the school buildings are burning, you don't go to the board and submit a letter. You race into that burning building and you grab your children and you take them home, and you don't ever take them back to that school. He said that's where we're at with schooling around the world. Do not allow your children into these indoctrination centres. It was an extraordinary, it was a very powerful conversation you had with Alex Newman, Jim. But Jim alludes to it there, Sasha. Many people I now interview talk about the spiritual war of good and evil, that there is a huge awakening around the world. One of our ambassadors, Victoria, has teenage and early 20-year-old boys. And they and their friends are all going back to church now. They're finding their own way back to a source beyond here, to be able to take on what they see for their generation is trying to ruin the world for their futures. Do you subscribe to that too? Do you feel we're in a spiritual battle of good and evil, and there are truly evil forces, but there is a far greater force that in the end will win? Let's start to look at solutions.
Absolutely, yes. I understand this as a fight of good against evil. I kind of caution people, these statements by Tucker Carlson. I saw that parts of that interview where he said about supernatural forces. I'd like to not go into the discussions of supernatural forces, because that kind of absolves the evildoers or people who are committing harm from responsibility a bit. That whole doctrine that, they're possessed by demons, and maybe they may be possessed by demons, but primarily it's human fear and our minds are the most powerful weapon in the world. And we can program ourselves by words. And I've written about it, that, there's a lot of discussion about these globalists want to implant microchips, and maybe these vaccines are communicating with antennas and so forth. And I dismiss this. I haven't seen any evidence of that actually happening. What I do see happening, and there's very, very good evidence, is that people are programmable, controllable by words alone, that they repeat, first of all, and then they incorporate into their own narrative and continue living it as if it's true. I've seen examples of a lot of people, and especially with this whole COVID hysteria, that people became like zombified, right? So you've all experienced this, right? You can be talking to somebody and giving them rational data explanation, and it could be a good discussion, and they will maybe even agree to your face, and then they'll go and get that shot.
Yes, it was incredible.
That's what they mean by programmability by words. And the people who are programmable, it starts with fear. That whole. So I also written articles about it. There's a theory of mind, involves usually two components of the mind, the rational and subconscious, and they have different names for them. And you can think of it as autopilot and human pilot. You can fly your plane most of the time on autopilot, but some key points you need to take control yourself. Like takeoffs and landings, or maybe something's going on. And that's how our minds work. It's the most efficient way to use the brain. Most of the time we're on autopilot. We don't even think or seek for, words to say. But when it comes to a critical point, we step back, we slow down, and we engage the real pilot. Now, if you are fearful, your propensity for that autopilot to be hijacked by whoever wants to control you through words that you then given to repeat, such as trust the science, follow the science, vaccines are safe and effective, all that. And when people repeat it enough, at some point their mental model, their verbal model, is so far away from the truth. It's like they're lost in the forest and they can't come back. They can't come back. The coming back part is somebody needs to go there and walk them back. And it's a long process and involves therapy and thinking and meditation and prayer and all kinds of restructuring, reprogramming. It's very difficult. For some people, maybe not possible, but I think most people can come back if given help, if they seek help. And so that's what we need to be mindful of: the language that we tell others, the words that we use ourselves, and those words that we repeat. Especially if you agree with somebody, don't repeat exact same words. Put it in your own language. Then it becomes your own. Then you engage in your real pilot, not just, submitting your autopilot, right?
That's beautiful, because if you have to put it in your own words, it involves your critical thinking part of your brain. You have to have worked it out and be able to understand and comprehend. So that brings us nicely back to where we began to end this very important discussion. This court case, I said at the beginning, needs to be followed and repeatedly interviewed on, I believe, Jim, around the world. It's a very important court case, the Leeuwarden, Netherlands court case. Why do you feel, Jim, that it's so crucial that people follow it, possibly to help themselves understand what has gone on in the last 5 years? What's its place in the panoply of history, really, on the COVID years?
There's three things in answer to that. So the first thing is, a lot of people are watching it because they want to bring court cases of their own against those individuals in other countries. So there's a big interest from that point of view. The second thing is, because of the charges that were being leveled, we're talking crimes against humanity, we're talking genocide, we're talking biological weapons, we're talking psychological operations, and we're talking about collusion with the mainstream media. Indeed, there was a couple of journalists, I think, that were accused of this. Collaboration with globalist institutions, that whole narrative. So yes, there's a lot of things going on. And the third reason is that there's a lot of people want justice for the harms, the deaths of loved ones, people's wives, their husbands, their children, their mothers, their fathers. I have many people that follow me who have told me personal stories about that, not publicly, but just personally, about what happened to them. So there is a deep desire for justice. And because of the charges that have been leveled against Bill Gates, Albert Bourla, Klaus Schwab, and others, Mark Rutte, there is a comparison that is sometimes made to the Nuremberg trials, where people went on trial there. And a lot of people around the world are saying that there needs to be a Nuremberg 2. There needs to be a proper trial. And these people, these expert witnesses like Sasha, like Michael Yaden and the others, should be allowed to give their expert testimony because they're experts in their own fields. But collectively, they can put in a very, very strong argument that would expose these people who have committed, in my opinion, the most egregious, the most heinous crimes against humanity. And they should stand trial for it. Going from the top of the tree all the way down to everybody that was involved, and just following orders is not an excuse. We heard that during the original Nuremberg trials as well. I was just following orders, doesn't cut it. You knew what you were doing. You went along with it. You paid the price. And justice has to happen. And I've often said, and I probably never will be, but if I was ever in a position of real power to do something about it, those people would face very serious justice. I can assure you of that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that. When we received the documents or arguments from the defendants, trying, in that hearing where we were asking the judge to hear our testimony. So the defendants, including the state of Netherlands, submitted legal argument against us as witnesses, each one of us individually. In my case, I've now written close to 600 articles on my Substack, and it's maybe 500,000 words or so. Out of everything that I've written and said online, they quoted me saying that this needs to be investigated. and we need to bring justice. So they put this quote in their argument, telling the judge that this disqualifies me as being an expert witness.
As if you had an ulterior motive. But that is what
yes, my ulterior motive was investigation and justice.
That is meant to be at the heart of every legal case. That is all every legal case is about. This preliminary trial from which you have now been excluded as an expert witness, that is a standard part of getting to the best people to stand in the main trial so that we get to the truth. And to have them playing this game, to have it being set up from January, as Jim said, where they're clearly trying to squeeze it out. I've seen the same with Barry Young, the games they're playing to try to keep the truth of the New Zealand people's data out of court where it can be cross-examined. And that's for another day, Sasha, and for another interview. But where to now for you with this? Where does this go? And have you expert witnesses all come together to talk about your future steps with this Netherlands case?
Yes, as I said, we're communicating with the legal team. We all have pretty much written our testimonies. They're extensive. We're going to be making some publicity presentations on this matter, videos perhaps. So this is in the works. Perhaps you could mention on your wherever you're going to publish on your platform, publishing this video that we ask people to contribute to the legal foundation. I'll send you the link. The legal foundation that helps prosecute this case, because it's important for people to support it. But as I said, we will be more public with our testimony that we prepared, and it will be coming out on various platforms, and obviously we'll include you guys as well once it's ready. And then hopefully Peter Stassen continues to prosecute. So Arno was originally involved in this case. Now he's been disbarred. He's not part of this case team anymore. And the charges, they finally came up with some crazy charges against him. They don't involve this case. So, while I personally support Arno, I think it's completely horrible what's been done to him. Important to understand he's no longer part of this case. It's being prosecuted by Peter Stassen and his colleagues.
Maybe on that, there are a couple of loose threads I want to tie up before we finish. Do you know if his mental state is all right? As Jim said, he's in a high security prison. There was no habeas corpus. He wasn't brought before the courts to be charged with anything until just recently. This is not the way the legal system is supposed to operate. Have you heard much about his state?
Yeah, that's the problem, that we don't have any communication. I talked to Peter Stassen, told us he didn't even know who Arno's attorney is. So it's absolutely incredible what they're doing. Absolutely incredible. Everybody should be up and up. This should be a scandal all over, front pages
everywhere.
Of media, if we had media, right?
If there is a support group for Arno van Kessel in the Netherlands, could you contact me or Jim on X or liz.gunn@freenz.org? And Jim and I will certainly, won't we, Jim, publicise whatever we can to support Arno, this lawyer who was simply standing up to help people who wanted to tell and expose the truth. It is extraordinary that that's happened in a supposedly Western country. The second loose thread before we finish, Tucker Carlson, what do you think was said at that meeting? What was behind that story? And do you think he's had any redemption since then, Sasha? Or, it will leave a question mark over a lot of people's heads, what you alluded to in this interview.
Right. Well, so Tucker Carlson, at the time, obviously, he was on Fox. He was part of mainstream. He subsequently left Fox, which I think, my personal opinion of him, slightly improved after that. So I was even, so he did. I want to, be fair. He does have good guests now. He seems to be more free in his own opinion, expressing his own opinion. He has demonstrated some development in understanding. So I don't know exactly in 2020. My guess would be he probably went on assignment to communicate, to talk to Trump about this virus and scare him into signing off. He probably presented the story of gain of function, made in China, Chinese bioweapon. This is a very standard narrative from U.S. Department of Defense going back to even the 40s when they were developing bioweapons officially. So they always blame China. They either blame China for anything that they did in the U.S. and went wrong. They would always say, oh, no, it's a Chinese virus. Or they would present something, they want to get more funding for some additional activity, some additional research, more testing of bioweapons or chemical weapons, development of some weapon systems. And the Congress says no. They say, well, if you say no, China is already ahead of us. Look at what China is doing. China is always excuse either to get more money and resources and do more stuff that the law prohibits, but they really want to. Or then if something goes wrong, they blame China. And probably the same narrative was sold to Trump. Trump is a germaphobe, known. So that wasn't difficult to scare him into, well, there's this secret bioweapon that was released by China. It's going to be a real, so, and from then on, he probably signed off on classifying national security and so forth.
Interesting. So there could be, in fact, I'd love to issue at the end of this interview an invitation to Tucker to have you on, Sasha. So to that end, for people who've listened to you right through this conversation but don't yet know your work, could you briefly sum up your background, which is, as with Catherine, a very strong background that you bring to this?
Right, so I should have done it from the start. So my experience is in pharmaceutical and medical device industries. So I've worked in R&D for about 25 years, and I ran my own businesses. So I was never an employee of a pharma company, as many people would like to accuse me of. But I was never an employee of a pharma company. I worked as a contractor for over 60 pharmaceutical companies as clients, including Pfizer, is a big pharmaceutical client. And as contractors, we were running clinical trials for them and also submitting data to the FDA and other global regulators. So I'm very familiar with the regulations, with how regulators work, with how pharmas work, and what's supposed to happen in clinical trials, what's not supposed to happen, what they knew about these products. And I've always been, from the start, I was blue in the face telling people that all of these harms were very well known by the FDA, very well documented on their own documentation, hanging on their website. And so nobody can say that we just didn't know. It was such a new technology. Oh, we were in a rush and mistakes were made. No mistakes were made. Nobody made any mistakes, and nobody is stupid here. So stop giving them that, they just don't understand. No, they do understand. It's all intentional.
I didn't start with that because I always assume people know who you are, but it's best never to assume. And so at the end of this interview, having just heard Sasha's qualifications, Tucker Carlson, if you would like a long-form interview with Sasha Lachapova, she is wonderful to interview. I can tell you that from personal experience. And I would also love Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and RFKJ to invite you again. I know you were already invited to be part of that team right in the administration. You may have been too much of an independent thinker, perhaps, to get in.
So the problem is they interviewed me from Maha transition twice. And I even invited me to submit all you submit the resume for potential work in government. They send you the links to do extensive IQ testing, extensive personality testing, which is, by the way, all illegal in private sector hiring.
And to perhaps
and then they identify you as, this is not a blackmailable individual. So no, X.
Where there's life, there's hope, Jim. I'm hoping that Sasha can get in there. Her what she offers to the world is just an incredible gift. Your final words on this discussion today, Jim.
I would say watch things closely. I want to thank you, Liz, for hosting us on here again today, and once again for the incredible work that you do in Freedom Train International. And just say to people, look, as the world gets darker, we get brighter. The fight for truth and the fight for freedom will continue at pace. As the globalists get more entrenched in their ways, we will push back even harder. So, get on to freedomtointernational.org, get signed up as a subscriber and start getting prepared. Remember, don't be scared, be prepared. So on that note, I'd just like to say a huge thank you. It's great to see Sasha. I don't always agree with Sasha's point of view when it comes to President Trump or Tucker Carlson or RFK, who I do actually admire. But nevertheless, we all do agree on all the other things. So it's always good. We can't always agree with each other on everything, can we? It'd be too boring if we were.
Well, it wouldn't be freedom, and we're all meant to stand for freedom. Sasha, I very much appreciate the work that you do and the truths you're willing to tell, and I would like to keep in regular contact with you so that the work that you're putting out into the world is kept safe and you are kept safe. The final word to you, Sasha, for people who are left from this interview saying, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. I want to protect my family, but what can I do? Your advice.
Well, yeah, I'm just one person, said 8 billion people. Okay, so that's what you need to think of. And yes, my advice always to people: you start from personal resistance and non-compliance. You start from committing, making a resolution, praying and meditating on it, to think and say and act the truth 100% of the time. 100% of the time. You can't lie. If you are lying, you're subject, as I described, to being captured and brought into the woods and left there. And so you have to always stay true and find the truth and speak it and act it. And then that will give you power to resist and say no. So when they're coming at you and saying, hey, sign up for this digital ID, you say no. Hey, submit your data to this database, you say no. Use real ID, you say no. Use other forms of documentation. Here, in the airport check-in line, you have to do the photo. Say no. Actually, you can decline. Most people don't know. I always decline. Educate yourself on your rights, educate yourself on what laws exist in your state, your province, your country, wherever you are. Think through what you're going to do in case of emergencies, water, power, food, money, and that will give you security or at least some kind of comfort, thinking through those possibilities. And from then on, you just say no, because as I said, they position themselves as all powerful. They threaten you with armies and weapons and this and that. It's designed to demoralize you. Resist that. Know that this is BS. They are deathly afraid of us, and they are quickly running out of money and resources to enforce all of these grand plans of how they're going to dominate. And I can guarantee you it's not going to work for them at all. So all we have to do is outlast them by personal resistance, non-compliance, and creating some kind of support structure.
Sasha Latypova, Jim Ferguson, what a wonderful interview. Thank you both very much. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much. Great seeing you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.